Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry because CloudFix uses AWS recommended savings techniques. It fixes, not just finds. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part of all, it works non-stop. Stop overspending on AWS and click on the link to start saving now.
All right, we are back with part 2 of the show. We have watched Peter DeSantis Monday Night Live keynote, and we wanted to summarize the most important parts of this keynote. This was all about AI inference and training. So I wanted to first start. Well, what did you think? What were your initial thoughts on the his starting about the investment in core technologies being like the roots of a tree? What did you think about that one?
Yeah, I think it's just a reinforcement of what I think Werner Vogel said maybe over a decade ago, where AWS always wanted to be the plumbing for the internet. This is an extension of that. They have always had that mindset where they've been investing in the core fundamental architecture of what the cloud is going to be. And I think the recap of exactly how they've evolved over all this time was quite fascinating, in my opinion. I mean, just a recap of how Nitro came about, and how they got that to be the solid foundation for everything that they've built on top of that, and then all the layers on the top of that. I think it's in AWS's DNA, is all I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. And when they talk about many years under their belt of custom silicon, custom networking, and he went on to talk about later about custom fiber optic cables that eliminate dust errors, so that way they don't have issues with rerouting in their networks. All of these things that they've done, which add up over time. Let's have a look at this analogy that he puts up. Let's put this on the screen.
Allowing them to thrive even when conditions are harsh. And one of the most unique things about AWS and Amazon is how our leaders spend considerable time in the details. And being in these details matter, because when you're in these details, you know what's really happening with your customers and your service. And that empowers you to make fast decisions, possibly fixing or preventing issues before they even happen. Now, this happens other places, but often that information has to percolate up many layers of the organization. And this never happens quickly enough. Just think about how much fun it is to tell your boss when something's not going well. It's no one's favorite thing to do, and it usually doesn't happen nearly quickly enough. Now, it's easy to say that you want to stay in the details. The hard part is building the mechanisms that you need to make sure you do.
I think that's good perspective of saying what it takes to actually be committed at this level, right? If they couldn't work on the details, they couldn't have iterated on 1, 2, 3, now 4 iterations of Graviton, Trainium, and Frentium. So they've got that track record. I think that was neat from a leadership perspective, from how do you run an organization that can do these big, expensive experiments at scale?
Yeah, and I think most people don't appreciate how difficult it is when you're talking about things being done at scale. To create a machinery that operates at a scale like AWS does, you are probably going to make decisions that are very counterintuitive to your more traditional small-scale decision-making approach. And it will not, it requires a different kind of thinking to achieve that. So, I mean, kudos to AWS. They've had a track record for, now almost 18 years since they've incorporated, and they've just been consistent with how they've done this.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the next part of the keynote, they brought in David Brown, who is an early EC2 inventor, and he was talking about the Graviton, talking about scaling out, right? So there's certain workloads scale out, meaning you can just add more compute. I wanted to play a quick clip from David Brown. I thought this was interesting. This is him talking about the amount of graviton that's out there.
Think about that. That's more graviton processors than all the other processor types combined.
I see.
But graviton wasn't the first place that we innovated at the silicon level. Early on, we knew that if we were going to deliver world-class performance and security for the ever-growing number of EC2 instances, we would need to innovate down the entire stack. And that story is the AWS Nitro system. The AWS Nitro system is a complete reimagining of the server architecture. And it's fun.
What do you think of that number? Were you surprised at that?
No, I think I was kind of expecting it. All the managed services, I think, already had a mandate to move to Graviton as soon as possible. And it just made sense that they were using Graviton first internally before giving it out to customers. So they were absolutely sure that this works as advertised. So it's kind of been one of the approaches that AWS has taken for a very long time, where when they do something, they first use it internally and then they give it out to other customers to try out. So yeah, not very surprising. What I also found very interesting in this section of the conversation was just before this, as David Brown was talking about how they evolved Graviton and the thinking behind what each generation unlocked. I think that was a really good summary. I think Graviton 2 was primarily about scaling out, letting your servers expand out. Graviton 3 unlocked a whole lot of new capabilities in terms of performance. And then Graviton 4 is just on steroids in terms of the kind of price performance that it can achieve. So I think we are starting to see this big inflection in the use of Gravitons on the AWS platform.
Yeah, definitely. And I thought it was very impactful when they actually brought out the Trainium 4 Ultra server.
Yep.
Just seeing how big it is, how custom it is. That was really, really neat. And yeah, I like that idea that they've been using it internally for services where they could A/B test it, they could get it into production without people even knowing. And then
and I think back to scale, right? AWS has incredible harnesses in place to A/B test out all the different changes that they're making to the services, including the hardware. And so the level of testing and rollout process that they'll have for their internal services would be hard to beat when you're looking at an individual customer or a set of customers that's trying to do the same. So I love the fact that AWS has been hardening all of these pieces of hardware and testing them, making sure that they're incredibly reliable, so much so that they are happy to run this on their own services. So I feel pretty confident about switching over to Graviton or the latest generation of Graviton as soon as they are available.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one of the uses they talked about, and this when Peter DeSantis went back on stage, of course, they talked about not just Graviton, but Trainium 2, and Trainium 2 being the training-specific chip. They spent a big portion of the talk on architecture, which is really interesting. Not a lot to say in terms of announcements in that portion, but really interesting to see how they're designing the chip for training, right? So structuring the memory layout so that they're not hitting the cache a lot, and so the data kind of moves through sequentially and the access is as quick as possible. Then Peter DeSantis made a really interesting point. I want to put this one on screen. Let's make sure I get this one shared this time.
Which does
there it is.
Generation.
Yep.
And one of the interesting aspects of token generation is that the model generates each token sequentially, one at a time. And this puts a very different set of demands on the AI infrastructure. Each time a token is generated, the entire model has to be read from memory, but only a small amount of compute is used. And for this reason, token generation puts lots of demand on the memory bus, but only a small amount of compute, almost the exact opposite of the pre-fill workload. So what do these workload differences mean for you and for AI infrastructure? Well, let's start with you. A short time ago, lots of workloads, like chatbots, mostly cared about pre-fill performance. And that's because when pre-fill's happening, the user's typically waiting and staring at a screen or a spinning wheel. But once tokens start being generated, you just needed to generate them faster than the human can read. And that's not very fast. But increasingly, models are being used in agentic workflows. And here, you need the whole response to be generated before you can move on to the next step of your workflow. So now customers care about fast prefill and really fast token generation. And that brings us to the interesting thing that's happening with the demand for AI inference infrastructure.
I thought that was a really interesting point, right? So when we're talking
Correct.
to a model, it just has to be fast enough for us. But
Exactly.
like we talked about earlier, the world is moving towards multi-agent orchestration. And when two agents are talking to each other, they don't have to talk at human speed at all. They can talk as
Correct.
fast as they want to. And so why not make it as
Exactly.
fast as possible?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. We need these systems to be, if you want really large throughput to happen at this at this level, you need these tokens to have as low latency as possible, so that more throughput can be achieved overall. Right now, I think we're highly constrained on throughput. So I do see that the next generation of LLM models, or the LLMs, are going to be more concerned about the speed of those tokens that are being generated.
Yeah, absolutely. And because they're talking to each other a lot more than they're going to be talking to us.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
was my mind drifted off for a second to the movie Her, when he had all of a sudden he was talking to I guess Scarlett Johansson's character,
Yep.
and he goes, "Wait, how many other conversations are you having right now?" He's like, "Oh, just
Yeah.
150,000 or whatever the number was," and it very quickly leaves the human scale and human speed
Right.
into a whole other universe that can chat a
Absolutely.
lot faster.
No, exactly. I mean, imagine being able to process a massive amount of data, very quickly. You're trying to replace a lot of the static automation that we have today with things that are more intelligent, and where decision making can be, increasingly more valuable. And right now, if you're bottlenecked on human inputs and stuff like that, you're replacing this with agentic flows. Number one, I think if you're just replacing human inputs and with an agentic flow, there are tons of benefits over there. You may not care about the latency as much, but if you really want to do this at scale, like process hundreds of thousands of insurance claims, you want to process a whole lot of content that is being posted on different social forums, things like that. When you're doing that and you want scale, you absolutely need the low latencies.
Well, speaking of low latency, that brings us to our next announcement, which I'll put on screen. Now, this was towards the very end of his keynote. Let's put this on screen. This is latency optimized for inference option for Bedrock.
I'm excited to announce a new latency optimized option for Amazon Bedrock, which allows you to have access to our latest AI hardware and other software optimizations to get the best inference performance on a large variety of leading models. Latency optimized inference is available starting right now in preview for select models. And one of those models is the widely popular Llama.
Okay, so now we have the latency optimized option starting right now. We just have to put another flag in the invoke model or in the converse model, and there you go. You have latency optimized up to, I think they said 60% faster.
Correct. I think 60% faster on a number of models, including the Llama one. And I think there's a big performance boost for Claude as well in this process. So it's going to be very exciting to see, how that performs. I haven't delved right into the pricing difference between those two. If you're using newer hardware and you're using, getting significantly more latency, it's probably going to be a little more expensive. But it's we'll dive into that as we get to digest all of this stuff.
Yeah, let's have a look at the next part of his update.
I'm excited to announce that in partnership with Anthropic, we're launching a latency-optimized version of the new and highly popular Claude 3.5 model. Depending on the request, the latency-optimized Haiku 3.5 runs 60% faster than our standard Haiku 3.5, and it provides the fastest inference for Haiku 3.5 anywhere. And like Llama, Haiku 3.5 is taking advantage of Trainium 2 to achieve this performance. But you don't need to just take my word for this. I'm really
Okay, so that's a Haiku 3, and Haiku, which is already fast,
Yeah,
and now that's faster, especially for things like tool orchestration, where it doesn't need to be necessarily creative. It just needs to do, put A to B to C together. It needs to be
correct.
clever, but not, it doesn't have to write poetry. I think that's going to be great, because
Very true.
I mean, in the systems that I'm experimenting with for tools, that's the frustrating thing, is just how slow it can be sometimes. And so
Yep.
I need to port it from Sonnet back to Haiku. That'll be a bit cheaper, and then
Correct.
edit it faster, and then Haiku, trying it with this low latency option, this high speed option. I'm looking forward to see how much more usable it's going to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm just waiting to get my hands on this stuff and try it out. Hopefully, you'll find some time today to play around with it, and we will definitely share our opinion about what we think about it.
Yeah, that's I hope you find the time. That's
That's that's the scarce resource right now while we are on the ground in Vegas at reInvent. So
well, I think maybe if you need some downtime, that's a perfect use of it. All right, let's put it in the next tab. So they brought in a speaker from Anthropic. Let's have a look.
yeah,
It's not perfect. And at our scale, it's worth trying to be perfect. A single performance optimization for Anthropic can unlock enough compute to serve 1 million new customers. This means it's worth it to drop down to a lower level, like Nikki, and write kernels as close as we can to the raw hardware. It's like moving from Python.
Okay, so this is Tom Brown from Anthropic. He is co-founder, and he was saying that I thought that was a neat statistic right there. One performance boost means 1 million new customers can be served. And
correct.
it's just showing how important it is with the scale. And what he's talking about here is how they can use model training with the special Trainium 2 architecture to because of the way it handles memory and the way it sequences the operations. It's a lot more efficient for a given amount of silicon.
Correct. So yeah, it's actually going to be really interesting to see what the next generation of models turn up with all this new hardware, all this new amazing performance. I'm hoping for the changes to happen on two different dimensions. Number one is I'm actually hoping for a faster turnaround on these models. With all this efficiency, with this much more power that's being pushed into these, I'm hoping that we can see more models more frequently. Right now, it's about 6 to 8 months between new models coming up from a given provider. I'm hoping that that'll shrink a lot more. And then lastly, I think the performance and efficiency of each of these models that are generated is going to be significantly better. They're going to be able to do more things than before. The only thing that I'm a little curious about is it more efficient to train a single modality model that does one specific thing, or is it more efficient to train a multimodal model, because that might actually enable a lot more use cases with a single model. So that's something that I really wish I can go find somebody today or tomorrow on the show floor and ask them this question. Folks who are actually building these foundational models, how do they think about this trade-off?
And then looking at the announcements from earlier on Bedrock, where we have the LLM as a judge, and we have the re-ranker model, right? So we are seeing the usage of these very application-specific models. So you're right.
Correct.
And we're definitely seeing multi-agent orchestration. And so what would be the point of multi-agent if they weren't different, right? And it's the same as humans, right? We want to have teams that aren't just a bunch of clones of the same person. Otherwise, what's the point? You want to bring in different people with different relative specialities. So
exactly,
same thing for models.
I think we have to wait and see how that spans out. I mean, you do have chips that are very specialized, and then you have very general purpose chips at that level, and they've had their evolution. I don't know how AI is going to evolve. I think we have to wait and watch but very fascinating space for sure.
Definitely. Let's watch the last clip. I think this is a pretty exciting one to kind of tie this whole thing
Yeah.
together. Where is this going?
The next generation of Claude will train on Project Rainier, a new Amazon cluster with hundreds of thousands of Trainium 2 chips. So hundreds of thousands of chips means hundreds of dense exaflops, over 5 times more than any cluster we've ever used. So what does Rainier mean for customers? Well, the world has already seen what we've been able to do with our last cluster. Earlier this year, Anthropic shipped Claude 3 Opus, the smartest model in the world. 4 months later, we shipped Claude 3.5 Sonnet, even smarter than Opus at a fifth the cost. Then, in the last month, we've shipped both 3.5 Haiku and an upgraded 3.5 Sonnet that can use computers like a human. Project Rainier will speed up our development even more, powering both our research and our next generation of scaling. This means customers will get more intelligence at a lower price and at faster speeds. Smarter agents that they can trust with bigger and more important projects. With Trainium 2 and Project Rainier, we're not just building faster AI, we're building trustworthy AI that scales. Thank you.
I think that's a really good wrap up, right? It's a smarter, faster, shorter cycle times, empowered by this enormous Trainium 2 clusters.
Exactly. And it couldn't be a more exciting time, right? I mean, we are starting to see all these cycles shorten. Innovation cycles are getting way faster. The LLMs are getting way better. And I think it's the right time to kind of point out at one trend that I have a strong opinion about, which is that it matters more to ride this wave rather than build a whole lot of custom fine-tuned models of your own. There are a bunch of folks who are building foundational models, and that's great, and I think they have a space. But for the large population out there that's just trying to figure out what to do with AI at this point, I would say try and figure out a way that you can use an existing LLM and use it in such a way where if there is a new model that comes down the line that's much better, then your application, your solution, the way you've architected it, is ready to make the most of that new model. You are placing a bet on the fact that over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, these models are just going to get much better, much faster, and have much more capabilities than they have today. So I think that's where I have my bets placed right now. There are others who are investing a ton in fine-tuning their models and trying to make the most of it today so that they can leverage what we have today and build out and roll out real-world applications with huge impact. So that's kind of a little bit of a trade-off. I think I'm sitting in the first set of bets being made, while there are a whole lot of folks in the second bucket.
Well, certainly when I'm writing code or telling an LLM to write code, and I see, okay, it's not necessarily the best organized in the world, but by the time I need it to be refactored, Claude 4 is going to be out.
Yeah.
And I can tell it, refactor this and make it perfect, and I don't have to deal with this right now. Right now it's good enough. Right now it works. If I ever need to do that, by the time I need to revisit it, why don't I just wait and see what the capabilities are at that point in time instead of planning for a future that I cannot possibly anticipate?
Exactly. And so that's the bet to be made. That said, there are other people making a different trade-off for the simple reason that they have a ton of data and they believe that they could take an existing model which is kind of good enough, but with fine-tuning it gets great for their use cases, and they're building that as they roll it out to customers. So I think this is one of the choices that most customers will have to grapple with. They're going to have to evaluate this for their situation and figure out what bets they want to make.
Well, maybe that's why reinvent's in Vegas. You have to be making the right bets.
Exactly. So with that, I want to thank all of you for coming and watching this show. We hope to bring you the next run of keynotes. I think in a few hours we're going to have Matt Garman and Andy Jassy's main keynote. So that's something to look forward to. What are you looking forward to next, Stephen?
Well, really, I'm going to be following several of the breakout sessions and following from social media. I have about 40 different tabs open that I'm refreshing on LinkedIn, on Blue Sky, on X. And make sure to follow us there as well. We're getting into Blue Sky. We'll be on LinkedIn, all of those different things, and have our AI-powered tools to help me distribute to all the different platforms. So, yeah, make sure to follow us there. Thank you for watching, and we will see you tomorrow morning.
Thanks, everyone.